whisper, Lord, if you want to, or will you teach me to rejoice before the breakthrough? 'Cause everything you touch is beautiful, and I know you're with me, Emmanuel. You're still working, so build me like a table, if that's what you will. Or tear me to pieces, just use me still. You are the potter, and I am a man. I don't need answers, I just need your hand. Even if it kills me, it's the safest place I'll be. Even if it kills me, it's the safest place I'll be. Come now and still these crashing waves, Lord, if you want to. Or teach me not to be afraid, simply to trust you. 'Cause everything you touch is beautiful, and I know you're with me, Emmanuel. You're still working, so build me like a table, if that's what you will. Tear me to pieces, just use me still. You are the potter, and I am a man. I don't need answers, I just need your hand. Even if it kills me, it's the safest place I'll be. Even if it kills me, it's the safest place I'll be. Down in the valley, you're still God. You're sovereign on every mountain top. Everything's working as it should. In every season, you are good. Down in the valley, you're still God. You're sovereign on every mountain top. Everything's working as it should. In every season, you are good. Down in the valley, you're still God. You're sovereign on every mountain top. Everything's working as it should. In every season, you are good. You are good. So build me like a table, if that's what you will. Or tear me to pieces, just use me still. You are the potter, and I am a man. I don't need answers, I just need your hand. Even if it kills me, it's the safest place I'll be. Even if it kills me, it's the safest place I'll be. It's the safest place I'll be.
Good morning, church family. It's good to see everybody again. We are walking through the book of Acts, and we're just about coming to the end. Today we'll be in chapters 27 and 28. We're going to be looking at a lot of history today, and that's very exciting for me because, number one, I love history, but when we can tie history to the Bible, it's the greatest of two worlds. But before we do, I want to just bring us up to speed on where we've been. So Paul has been in Caesarea for the last 2 years on trial. The Jews have been accusing him of attempting to instruct all other Jews that they no longer need to follow the law of Moses. So they can abandon Moses, they can abandon the law, they can abandon all their rituals and their way of life. And so he's been on trial. He's been standing before 2 governors in Caesarea. The last governor, Festus, when Paul presented his case to Festus couldn't figure out what the charges would be. Paul had appealed to go to Caesar, to go to Rome and see Caesar. And so he has to go there, but in order for him to go, there needs to be some charges brought against him. Otherwise, Festus probably would look like he doesn't know what he's doing. So just so happened that King Agrippa shows up, and Festus, the governor, mentions to King Agrippa, hey, I've got this guy named Paul. He's on trial. I can't find anything that's wrong. I've got to send him to Rome to see Caesar, but there's nothing that I can send with him to convict him. And so he presents his case again for the 3rd time before King Agrippa. King Agrippa doesn't find anything wrong with him either, and actually says to Paul, or to a group of people, we would let him go, but he's appealed to Caesar, so to Caesar he must go. So that concludes all the way through chapter 26. In chapter 27, we pick up his voyage from Caesarea all the way to Rome. And that goes through 2 chapters, chapter 27 and chapter 28. So what I want to do is I want to take an opportunity to show you his travel on the map behind me, because there's some really cool things that I've discovered this week that I thought was amazing. And I think you will feel the same way. So I'm going to read through this as we go. I'm going to show you on the map behind me the direction and the route that he took to go from Caesarea to Rome. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of the Adramatium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea and accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon. So here, I know you probably can't see these, and that doesn't really matter. Just want to kind of give you an idea of where things are on the map. But here's Israel here, here's Caesarea. So they begin their journey here at Caesarea. They put in at Sidon, and they get on another ship here at Sidon, and they're literally traveling the coast here, the coast of what they called Asia. They're going to travel the coast all the way up through here is what we're going to see. And they're going to make a port here in Myra. So let's continue reading here. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go with his friends and be cared for. And putting out to sea from there, we sailed the lee of Cyprus. And here's Cyprus here. And so there was a westerly wind that was blowing. And so in order to gain some ground, or as so to speak, they traveled, it mentions the lee of Cyprus. So really they're trying to take cover against an adverse wind. And so this wind is blowing in from the west, and so they're hugging the coastline, and they're trying to to take cover as they sail past Cyprus, and this is where we are here. We sailed slowly, let me see, and when we had sailed across the open sea, so they went across Cyprus because the winds were against us, and when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myrna and Lycia. So this is Myrna and Lycia here. So they come to Myrna and Lycia. There, the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us aboard. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty at Cnidus. And so here now they're literally going right into the wind, this westerly wind, and they're having a very difficult time. And so again, they try to hug the coast. There's a few islands through here and all around through here, small islands. And so they finally get over to the coast and the port of Cnidus. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off of Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go further, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmon. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. So, okay, this is the whole reason why I wanted to show you the map. So they sail and they're going directly into a headwind, and so they sail up here to Cnidus. They get to Cnidus and they're just not able to continue going forward. And so they decide to navigate down through here. So they come down through here and they come to Crete. And so they're trying to allow the island and the mountains and everything on the island to kind of push the winds aside. And so they sail along the southern coast of Crete and they come along to this place right here. And the text, Luke tells us that it's a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. So I want to stop here for just a minute. You're going to see on your screen a map. So I pulled up a Google map. I looked up this word, the word Fair Havens. I was looking at the Greek in the original language. This word is Kaloi Limenis. I don't know how to pronounce it, but that's the original Greek wording for the word that's been translated into Fair Havens. And so I pulled up a Google Earth, and I just started blowing up Google Earth and looking along the southern coast of Crete. And I come to this place right here, and there is still a city there with the name Kaloi Limenis, and which is translated Fair Haven. And so I just continued to zoom in on the Google map, and I just started noticing some interesting things. And so I started doing some research. And in my research, I found that there's a cave here, and we'll put a picture of this cave on the screen for you. There's a cave here that legend says that Paul actually stayed in while he was here. I don't know if he did or not. We really can't validate that, but I think it's cool. And then just above where this cave is, there's the remains of an old Byzantine church that was built. Now, the Byzantine Empire was part of the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire was known as the Eastern Roman Empire up until almost 400 AD, probably around 375. It started to break up, and out of that came the Eastern Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire. So there's a church there from the Byzantine Empire period that has been, that's ruins now, but on top of it, they've built another church. This was built in the early 1900s, I think 1911. So this place has been a place of worship and recognition that Paul was there for over 2,000 years. I think that's amazing, and I just love the Bible when we're able to see the history of that. But it gets even better than this. So verse 9, since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, "Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo of the ship, but also of our lives." But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on a chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. And so the goal was to make their way all the way up into here to where Phoenix is. But what happened was when they sailed from this this area of Fair Havens, when they began to sail, there became this huge wind, and it got worse and worse. So let's pick back up. So they decided to chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete close to the shore. But soon, a tempestuous storm called a nor'easter struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught, it could not face the wind and gave way to it and were driven along, running under the lee of a small island called Cauda. We managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Since they were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, no small tempest lay on us. All hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of God to whom I belong and to whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island.' When the 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. A little further on, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. So this was 120 feet deep, and the second sounding was 90 feet deep. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under the pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved.' And the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go." So they were going to try to lower down the smaller boat and try to get on the smaller boat to navigate and get onto the shore. But Paul let them know that if they tried to escape in this way, they would all be in trouble, that they would not be saved. And so they cut the ropes and let the boat drift away. As day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take food, saying, "Today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength, for not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you." And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then they all were encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out all the wheat into the sea. Now when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach, on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cut off the anchors and left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied to the rudders. Then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broke up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and to make for the land, and the rest on the planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. After we were brought safely through, we then learned that the island was called Malta. The native people showed us unusual kindness, and they kindled a fire and welcomed us all, because it had begun to rain and was cold. When Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and put them on the fire, a viper came out, because of the heat and fastened on his hand. When the native people saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, "No doubt this man is a murderer. Though he has escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live." He, however, shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. They were waiting for him to swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But when they had waited a long time and saw no misfortune come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. Now in the neighborhood of that place were lands belonging to the chief man of the island named Publius, who received us and entertained us hospitably for 3 days. It happened that the father of Publius lay sick with fever and dysentery. And Paul visited him and prayed, and putting his hand on him, healed him. And when this had taken place, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases also came and were cured. They also honored us greatly. And when we were about to sail, they put on board whatever we needed. So let me just go back to the map for just a second. So they had this westerly wind all along, and they were having difficulty sailing. They're trying to get way up here. They're trying to go up here to Rome. And so, but they're having a very difficult time. So they keep finding these harbors and they keep staying, like they stayed here at Fair Havens, which is still there today. And as they came around here and was trying to come around to Phoenix, a nor'easter came. So now there's a tremendous storm, and it's a northeasterly storm. So now it's blowing this way. So they broke loose here and they started to drift. So they're drifting this way because the wind is blowing them this way, but ultimately they're trying to go way up here. They're trying to get up here to go to Rome. And so they're trying to steer the boat this way, and the wind is this way here, and the wind is blowing them this way. So as they're drifting and trying to sail northward and being blown south and southwest, they come and they just keep coming this way and coming this way, and they land on the island of Malta. So, but there was a shipwreck, and we're told here some very interesting details. We're told that I'm going to put a picture of a Google Earth picture of Malta as well on your screen, and we're going to zoom in here in just a moment. But just imagine this northwesternly attempt to go north, but being pushed west, southwest, that they find their way over here on this island of Malta. So we're told a few things. We're told that as they began to approach ground, they did a sounding and found that they were in 120 foot deep of water. They did a sounding again a little bit later, found themselves in 90 feet of water, and so they assumed the terrain is coming up. They knew that they were approaching land somewhere. So they threw out 4 anchors. There was a reef there that they were trying not to crash onto. They threw the 4 anchors out. This is in the middle of the night. And then so Paul has this conversation with them in the middle of the night, tells them they need to eat, that they're going to be fine, no one's going to die. And so when the sun came up the next day, they could see that there was a beach on the land. And so they decided to cut the anchors, cut the ropes free, cut the anchors free. They left the anchors in the sea, and they're going to throw the sails up and try to find guide it into the beach area. Well, they hit a reef, and they crash on the reef, and the waves are crashing on, and it's starting to break the boat apart. And so they finally they all jump into the sea, and they're floating on debris and things like that, and they make themselves to shore. They get on the shore, and it's a sandy beach. They get there, and the people treat them very kindly. Let me tell you a little bit very quickly about Malta in the 1st century. So Malta was part of the Roman Empire. It was a very wealthy island, actually. They were known for textiles, very high quality textiles. There was a temple to Juno, the goddess of Rome, the protector of Rome there. And it was a very influential and wealthy place to be. So I don't want you to imagine what said the inhabitants there, that they treated us kindly to think there were some kind of tribal people. No, they were part of the Roman Empire and influenced greatly by the Roman Empire. So, but there's a lot of history in Crete that prehistory, way back to the Neolithic age, the Stone Age. But we'll leave that maybe for another time. So these were wealthy people. When all these people came ashore, 297 people, I think is what the number was, or 276 people. When they come to shore, they're treated very kindly. They build a fire because it's raining, it's cold. And when they do, a snake comes out of the wood that's on fire and bites and latches on to Paul. So everyone assumes, they're all religious people, everyone assumes that he escaped from the storm on the sea, but fate would have it that he's still going to be killed because he must be an evil man. So they're waiting for him to die. He doesn't die. And because of that, they think that he's a god, actually. This is really important because this is really cool stuff. So now this man named Publius comes along, and his father is sick. He's a very wealthy man, a landowner. His father is very sick. Paul actually heals him, and once word gets out that he healed Publius's father, then everyone brings all their sick. Paul heals all of them. So legend has it that, not necessarily legend, but even the people that now live on Malta, everyone believes that before Paul had left, he was here for 3 months, before Paul left, he converted the entire island to Christianity, the entire island. And this is really important. So let me just back up again. We're going to put another picture. We're going to zoom in on Malta, because there's some really cool things that happen here. And so as the ship is trying to go north, but being pushed westward, it's going this northwesterly direction. And so it has to make landfall somewhere on the southern or the eastern side of Malta, probably on the southeastern part of Malta as it's coming in. And as we zoom in, you'll zoom in on Malta, you're going to notice a couple of things. We're told that there was a reef out in front of this area that had a beach. There's only a few places that have a beach on Malta. Most of it is rocky cliffs. And so there's only a couple of places that have a sandy beach. And to have a sandy beach and a reef out in front of it, there's really only one. We'll zoom in a little bit more. This is called the Bay of St. Thomas. There was a guy who was doing some research. It's believed that Paul landed somewhere on the other side of the island, which wouldn't really make a lot of sense. Where they believe that he landed, there's no sandy beach there. And so this guy comes in and he starts doing a lot of history, a lot of digging. He finds some divers, local divers, and has them. This is back in the 1980s, I think. He gets some local divers to take him around and show him where would there be a place where there was 120 foot of water depth down to 90, where there's a reef, where there's a sandy beach. And all of this only concludes one area, which is on the other coast, on the east coast of Malta, the south east coast of Malta, and it's a place called St. Thomas Bay. Now, that was kind of very telling to this individual who, his name was Bob Cornuke, who did all this investigating and all this research. And so he felt very strongly that this must have been the beach where Paul actually was shipwrecked. And again, this is very recent. This is within the last 30 years that all of this has taken place. So he again elicits some divers and he's just asking, like, I wonder if there's any way to prove that if this is where Paul landed. So he's talking to some local divers. And he's talking to them about the biblical narrative, and they're all Christian. To this day, Malta is, I think, 96% Christian, Roman Catholic. But anyway, so he talks to these divers, and the diver that he's talking to actually tells him, he says, "You're not going to believe this." And I'm not even sure I believe this myself, but in the 1960s, me and a few of my friends, we found 4 Roman anchors in St. Thomas's Bay within 40 yards apart. 4 Roman anchors. We'll show you a picture of what they look like. Now, they're long lead anchors. They've got a hole in the middle of them where there would have been a wood beam, and you could see that in the picture that's on the screen there. They found 4 of them. Unfortunately, because lead was very precious, especially to all the divers, and diving is huge in Malta. 2 of those crosses they actually melted down to use as weights for diving. One of them was given to the widow of one of the other divers, and the other one is actually in a museum. They still have it in the museum. They don't know where the other one is. They have never been able to locate it. But this diver, and he introduced him to the other divers that were still alive that were with him, and they all corroborated the same story, that they had found these 4 Roman anchors that have been dated. They've already been dated to the Roman era, that were found in the Bay of St. Thomas, that has a beach, that has the reef that the ship would have been stuck on. All these anchors were 40 yards apart. This just blows my mind. Here's the coolest part to me. So as I just continue to do more and more research, I did a little bit of history, because I love history, and I think it's important, especially when it coincides with a biblical narrative. And so I did a little bit of history. And here's a little bit of history on Malta. Let me just share a few things. It was part of the Roman Empire until the Roman Empire split. This was about in 395 AD, and it split, and it became the Eastern Roman Empire at that time, and the Western Roman Empire at that time, and became known as the Byzantine Empire. Between 395 and 870, it remained. There was a lot of conflict going on. They had this period of time called the migration period, where there was a lot of groups that were going in and trying to conquer the Byzantine Empire. It was called the migration because there were so many different groups that were coming and going and coming and going. Well, during that period, over a period of several hundred years, Malta was conquered or occupied many times by many different groups of people. And this went on up until 870. It remained still part of the Byzantine Empire, but it kept changing hands through this period, and it would be conquered and occupied, and all these influences were finding their way into the Maltese culture. So in 870 AD, the Arabs conquered, and this which kind of spurred, they came in and conquered the whole region, which spurred on the Crusades, which we all know about. And so during that period, the Arabs came in, they conquered Malta as part of everything else. They conquered Malta. They destroyed almost everything that was there. Almost all the buildings were destroyed. It was left almost completely uninhabited. Very few people were left there. And a couple hundred years later, it was repopulated by Arabs from Sicily. This was in 1048 and 1049 AD. It was repopulated by the Arabs from Sicily. And the Christians that were there were allowed to stay there, because remember, Paul had converted the entire island to Christianity, and the Christians that were still there were allowed to continue to exercise their religion as long as they paid a tax. And so things were somewhat kosher. In 1091, it was conquered by Norman. And from that period, from 1091, and it becomes known as the Kingdom of Sicily. But from that period on until about, I think 1798, it was part of the Holy Roman Empire, I guess. It was under a lot of different names. There was a time and point where the French were there, but they didn't stay there very long. And so again, it changed a little bit. It changed from kingdoms and dynasties and all these things, but still remained kind of part of what was called the Holy Roman Empire. And then I've got a point to all this, so bear with me. And in 1798, Napoleon comes. He conquers Malta. He's on his way to Egypt, but he conquers Malta on the way. Just a couple of months later, still the same year, in 1798, the people of Malta reach out to Britain and ask to be under Britain control. They didn't like being under Napoleon's control, the French control, and so they asked to be under the Britain control. And in 1814, under the Treaty of Paris, they become part of the British Empire. And They gained their independence in 1964. In 1974, they become a republic. And in 1989, just the last bit of facts about Malta, in 1989, to end the Cold War, President Bush and the Soviet leader Gorbachev meet face-to-face for the first time on Malta and formally ends the Cold War. So Malta has a very rich history, and they've been conquered and dominated by many groups of people over a 2,000-year period. Here's why I think all of that is really interesting, because when you go to Malta today, even with all those influences and being under the control of all these different empires and countries and nations and dynasties and leaders, if you go there today, it's still a Christian nation, and they regard Paul as their saint. They all remember and celebrate the fact that Paul is the one who brought Christianity to Malta. He's highly regarded as somebody incredibly special. And I think that's very telling. Why do I share all of this? It's very simple. And I'm going to end with this. Like I said, I love when history and the biblical literature, I love when they line up, because here's what this story does for me. It proves to me that what's written in the Bible is true. Literally everything that Paul describes on this journey, the way the wind was blowing and the directions that they took, like it matches with exactly how things would have had to happen. That they came across this place called Fair Haven. You can go to Fair Haven today. It's still there. There's a cave there they say Paul stayed in when he was there. It's an ancient cave. There's a Byzantine period church that's there it's no longer there, but they've built another church on top of it. All this just begins to lend more and more evidence that this factually, historically happened. When they go to make their way to Malta, and the way that they were trying to go north and the wind was pushing them south and west, they land on Malta. The Bible tells us that there was a beach. It tells us that there was a reef. It tells us that they went from 120 feet to 90 feet. St. Thomas's Bay fits this description perfectly. It also tells us that they had let out 4 anchors on a Roman vessel. They let out 4 anchors, and they end up cutting the ropes and it literally says, and we left the anchors in the sea. And in the 1960s, Maltese divers found 4 Roman-era anchors within 40 yards apart in St. Thomas's Bay. And they were dominated over a period of 2,000 years. They were conquered and oppressed and occupied for over 2,000 years by all these groups of people. And yet when you go there today, it's still the same message as it was when Paul left, because they believe that Paul converted the entire island to Christianity before he left. And when you go there today, it's still all Christian. And they regard Paul as their saint, St. Paul, the one who brought Christianity to the island of Malta. And they're regarded, he's regarded as that and celebrated as that still to this day. It's a tremendous part of their culture and their heritage. It survived all of these other things that happened over 2,000 years. That truth and that reality has survived all of that, and that is still their identity. Among all other things, that is their identity. That's incredible to me. In the 4 Roman anchors, we can never prove that those 4 anchors were actually on Paul's ship that was shipwrecked there on the island of Malta. We can't prove that, but my goodness, with all the evidence that's there and on this journey and the details that Luke gives us in the biblical narrative, here's what it does for me, and I hope it does for you. It cements even more for me that the Bible is true, that it's accurate, that there's no fallacies in it, and it also builds my faith that these things really did happen. That Paul really did meet Jesus on the road to Damascus. He really was a part of persecuting the church. And he met Jesus, and that encounter with Jesus changed his life in such a way that he became the greatest proponent of Christianity all over the world. And he ultimately gave his life, as we're going to discover in the next week. He ultimately gave his life for what he believed to be true. And the biblical narrative that we just read in chapters 27 and 28 is proven out in history to be true. I hope it builds your faith as much as it does mine. God bless you. Can't wait to see you next week.
Well, good morning, Fuel Church. We hope that it's been just an incredible day. We hope that you feel closer to Jesus. We hope that you've met with God this morning. And we just pray that all of us, including the staff, would just be sanctified further and would be in greater dependence and reliance upon the Holy Spirit. And I just want to make you aware of a couple things. The first thing is that we're trying to do some housekeeping and update some contact info for all of our partners and even our regular attendees. So if you're watching this, would you please text the word update to 863-485-6888. If you could do that for us, that would be just a simple way for us to kind of gauge if we have the correct contact information for everybody watching or attending. The second thing is that we have a night of worship coming up actually on November 1st, 2020. It's a Sunday night. It's going to be at 6 o'clock. And this is going to be a time where we just declare over America that Jesus is our King. No matter what happens in this election, that doesn't change our hope and our future as Christians, because Christ is the only King. And so we just want to reiterate that and go over that in this time, in this very tumultuous political climate. We just want to reiterate that Christ is King above all. We love you guys. Kids Church is starting up September 27th. We're so excited about that. We're excited to just have everybody back together as one church family and not have to be separated. And hopefully this will just kind of get back to where we have everybody once again worshiping God together in the same place, singing His praises, listening to His word, taking communion together, and just being the bride of Christ. We love you guys. We hope that you have an amazing day full of worship and giving glory to the King.